Vela's paws were throbbing painfully. Her spine ached. Her muscles screamed in protest. Even her sensitive ears felt raw from the constant barrage of shouting. The Galactic Defense Command had assured her that human military training would be straightforward. Just observe their methods and bring the knowledge back to strengthen their own forces. Now she was certain she'd been deliberately misled. Vela collapsed onto the ground with an exhausted sigh, not bothering to move her tail out of the way as she sat beside Nexus and Thorn. They too were dropping to the earth, with Thorn landing face first into the grass, his military pack wobbling on his soaked uniform and weapon clattering beside him. Vela belonged to the Canary, a semi-bestial species from Luminar. Her people were characterized by their muzzles and paws, and the humans persistently called her Fuzzy, despite her repeated requests to stop. Her fur was a tawny bronze, common on her homeworld, yet she couldn't understand why the humans found it so amusing. Nexus was a Serpenian, a reptilian species that humans constantly compared to cobras, small earth snakes. The Serpenians and these earth creatures shared distinctive hoods around their heads and forked tongues, though Serpenians had legs and feet similar to humans. Thorn was a Sylvani, a shorter race with vibrant skin from the moon Australis. Despite being a slender athletic species with deeply colored, pupilless eyes, they had pointed ears and shared many features with humans. This similarity led to constant teasing from human recruits who called him various nicknames depending on the day: Recruit Halfling, Moonshine, Fae, Shadow, or Recruit Shelf Dweller, whatever that meant. There had been more names, but the humans apparently felt compelled to rotate through them. This kind of behavior seemed commonplace among humans, who mocked themselves even more ruthlessly, as if they were easing up on the extraterrestrial species, while still ensuring they were included in this strange ritual. Vela observed her fellow aliens and frowned at how visibly they were struggling. They had all been sent to this miserable planet to attempt human basic training, a trial all new human soldiers endured to separate the weak from the strong. Afterward, they would incorporate these methods into their own world's inadequate training regimens. Earth was producing some of the most formidable fighters in the galaxy, their training making even the Kreshik pale in comparison. The Kreshik were an insectoid species with blades on their secondary limbs, "weir" being the operative word. Humans had obliterated every nest they discovered, and many firmly believed the Kreshik were extinct. "All right, my little star travelers," their human instructor called out, his brown formal hat showing no signs of perspiration. "I'll give you a few minutes, then we continue our march. You need to be in perfect condition to meet standards." Vela bared her teeth in a quiet, pained snarl, as did many of her fellow Canary. These drill instructors were a particularly psychotic and sadistic variety of human that always made Thorn shiver with dread. They wore plain olive uniforms with brown formal hats adorned with shiny metal emblems indicating their status. They appeared tireless, relentless, and were among the most intimidating beings she had ever encountered. Even the Serpenians cowered away from them. One Serpenian had once flared his hood at a drill instructor, baring his fangs threateningly. The human had beaten the Serpenian severely. It wouldn't have been so egregious if the Serpenian hadn't initiated the confrontation by attempting to slash the human, but the message was unmistakable. Human drill instructors were not to be challenged. Humans in general were exceptionally tough and resilient beings, called Iron Children by some planets, while others had far more ominous names for them. The Kreshik reportedly called humans blood drinkers in their own language, noting the humans' willingness to engage in close combat and tear limbs from Kreshik warriors. That was why Vela, despite wanting to howl and sink her teeth into the human's throat, averted her gaze as the instructor patrolled down the road, examining the human recruits who waited patiently while their off-world companions rested in the grass. "I said show me your feet, recruit," drill instructor Raven repeated, and Vela complied, removing her modified boots and pulling the cushioned sock from her pawed feet. Drill instructor Raven circled around, clicking her tongue disapprovingly as she knelt and took the foot in her hand. "Your feet are too soft. Same with the other canary, I'm sure. They'll toughen up after more marching. Hey, recruit. Drill Instructor Raven locked her icy blue eyes onto Vela's pink ones, her short blonde hair framing her face like the sides of a helmet. She appeared so petite and attractive despite what Vela had witnessed her do. Most human females were appealing, but there was barely restrained savagery in those eyes that terrified her. Vela wondered if she would tear off her foot for insubordination, so she lowered her head, keeping her voice soft and turning to expose her neck. Yes, Drill Instructor. When the human moved away safely, Vela bent her leg to inspect her foot. It was raw and blistered, with several spots bleeding into her sock. She had always prided herself on her tough paw pads, but apparently the advanced footwear from her planet had been a crutch compared to these modified combat boots. Were they designed to cause pain? I want to go home, Thorn muttered into the grass, still face down with his legs splayed behind him. My feet hurt, my body hurts, everything hurts. Nexus hissed in agreement, gulping water rapidly before coughing and wiping his chin with his sleeve. It's incredible they maintain this pace. They don't even appear tired. We ran for miles this morning for physical training. Vela sighed, replacing her sock as she watched Drill Instructor Raven harass other alien recruits. Then we ate, and now we're marching like primitives. Thorn bumped his head against the grass repeatedly, his pack shifting on his back. I don't want to be here anymore. They'll make us eat those revolting rations out here again, Nexus said with a grimace. He enjoyed the dining facility and the food humans prepared, but their combat rations left much to be desired. Vela tilted her head backward, her long furry ears splaying out along her pack. Mother help us. The combat rations. Did you know the one I had yesterday was ancient? Ancient. It belongs in a museum. Vela, Nexus, and Thorn continued lamenting their situation until they were ordered back onto their feet. Just a few more miles to go, my little alien minions. Come on now, up and at 'em. My humans are getting cold, Drill Instructor Storm called out, spitting a stream of brown juice into the grass. Vela groaned as she stood, as did Nexus, and together they hauled Thorn back onto his feet. The diminutive Sylvani looked half dead as they resumed trudging down the gravel road. Vela glanced toward the humans. They walked with ease despite the distance they'd already covered. She noticed their packs were larger than her own. She grimaced, baring one of her long canines, then looked back at the long line of struggling aliens ahead. If the humans had been veterans or experienced soldiers, she would have been less frustrated. However, the humans beside her were ordinary civilians, fresh recruits who had simply followed the mandatory exercise regimens of human governments. She inhaled deeply, catching their scents. She was surrounded by bakers, mechanics, teachers, artists, farmers, hunters, professional drivers smelling of cleaning products, leather workers, coffee servers, and even food delivery humans. She could still detect cheese and tomato sauce on them even at this stage of training, making her stomach growl. There had been more aliens than currently remained. Those still present numbered only in the hundreds, significantly fewer than the thousands who had started this training cycle. They were expected to drop out individually or in pairs, but instead, her fellow galactic citizens had withdrawn in massive groups, some not even surviving the first few weeks of hazing and verbal abuse. Vela's thoughts were interrupted by the humans breaking into song. She rolled her eyes, her ears folding back in annoyance. Humans always sang when conditions were miserable. Even now, with the scorching sun beating down on them relentlessly, how they could find the motivation to sing was beyond her comprehension. From the narrowed eyes of her fellow aliens, she suspected they shared her irritation. The remaining miles felt interminable, and when the concrete structures of a training facility finally appeared around a bend in the road, Vela's heart sank. We walked all the way to our training site, Thorn exclaimed, his face dripping with sweat as his bright orange pupilless eyes dulled in color. We're expected to train after all this walking. Drill Instructor Storm chuckled from behind Thorn, clapping him on the shoulder. Of course. How else would we toughen up fresh recruits if we transported them everywhere? You have armored personnel carriers, aircraft. I've even seen you humans descend from the sky with fabric canopies, yet we walked the entire way. Why? Thorn cried, bending over to rest his hands on his knees, gasping for breath. Drill Instructor Raven strode up beside Vela, walking backward while addressing both humans and aliens. It's weapons training day, recruits. This will be your first rifle and pistol qualification, starting with rifles. Vela eyed the weapon hanging from her shoulder. It was an odd amalgamation of plastic, metal, carbon fiber, and electronics. On her world, they used pulse rifles firing plasma bursts powered by micro-reactors. Though limited in range, the Sylvani propelled metal darts via magnetic rails, also powered by their version of micro-reactors, but they fired slowly, requiring reloading, charging, and discharging from a specialized magazine. The Serpanians avoided firearms entirely, focusing instead on armor and shield projectors that protected them from projectiles, plasma, and other attacks. This allowed them to engage at close range using their radiating energy blades and serrated axes to dismember their enemies. Despite these technologies, they had fallen to the Kreshik assault, all except humans. Humans who still employed chemical propellant and metal projectiles to destroy their adversaries. Their weapons fired faster, reached farther, and penetrated armor and shields effortlessly. As Vela examined her rifle, a TCL Striker, she couldn't help but frown at it. Integrated sound suppression, advanced caseless ammunition, digital ranging computer, multiple firing modes, and a standard magazine capacity. It was practically prehistoric. They even retained a mounting point for a blade attachment and expected their troops to fix long knives to the end and use the rifle like a spear. How in the stars did humans defeat the Kreshik? Vela wondered silently as she limped forward with the line of recruits toward the firing range. With packs stored and temporary shelters established, they assembled at the range itself. It was as primitive as possible, just sandbag emplacements and electronic targeting systems that transmitted data to small devices showing where rounds impacted. Vela stared at the targets positioned at extreme distances and turned to Thorn. They can't be serious. Deadly serious, Thorn sighed, his rifle nearly as tall as he was. Humans can place one of these caseless rounds into a target's head at extreme distance using their targeting computers. They can hit targets at moderate ranges using just their basic sights. They're what? Nexus hissed, examining his rifle in confusion. Thorn flipped the Serpanian's rifle around, pointing to a small steel stud at the rear of the weapon and a similar Y-shaped stud at the end of the barrel. These, we have to qualify with the computer, and these today. They can't be serious, Vela exclaimed, staring at the two iron sights with dismay. They expect us to use just these two metal pieces to hit a target. It's bad enough we can't use helmet displays yet and must look through this tiny box. Vela gestured at the targeting computer optical sight mounted on the rifle, but Thorn merely shrugged. First squad, take your positions. Drill Instructor Storm called out, and a line of humans occupied the firing stations, arranging themselves efficiently. They train in their schools, Thorn remarked absently, resting the stock of his rifle on the ground and wiggling a finger in his tall ear. From childhood through adolescence, they train with even older rifles in their educational institutions. It's mandatory to graduate. Vela clicked her tongue. Barbaric. What business do children have training for warfare? According to humans, it's a they won't be children forever mentality. Thorn replied, flicking the debris from his finger into the grass. Vela noticed this and raised her bushy eyebrows. When you first arrived, you only did that in the privacy of the showers with your ear cleaners. We used to have time for it. Thorn grumbled, though Vela suspected the humans' habits were influencing the Sylvani. As the humans assumed their positions and awaited instructions, other soldiers staffing the range emerged from concrete bunkers and observation rooms, many carrying their own rifles. Vela noticed they were mostly non-commissioned officers, surgeons, and such. each taking position between two shooters. "What are they doing?" Nexus asked, tilting his hooded head. "Multiple rounds at long distance. Pause and wait for further instructions when firing sequence is complete. Range is active," a voice announced over the communication system, and the first human fired downrange. The tracer round flew through the air, striking precisely in the center of a distant target, causing nearly every alien observer to recoil. She hit it on her first attempt," Vela remarked, her ears perking up then, drooping in a mixture of fear and curiosity. All the aliens stepped backward in stunned unison when the officers standing between the shooters began firing around the prone recruits, spattering their faces with soil and debris. "Move, and you die," Drill Instructor Storm shouted, pressing the microphone against his throat, his voice booming around them. "Do not flinch, do not jerk your head, stay focused on your target." Thorn stumbled backward several more steps when Drill Instructor Raven unleashed a burst of automatic fire around a human's head as he fired, barely missing his fourth shot on target. "They're insane." The humans weren't finished. Barrels of crew-served mortar weapons emerged from the bunker, and with thunderous booms, they launched mortar rounds high into the air. The projectiles descended a short distance from the recruits, and all the aliens dropped to the ground as the rounds completed their arcing trajectories, exploding in plumes of earth and soil. "What are they doing?" Nexus shrieked, trying to press himself against the ground as tightly as possible. "Why are they using explosives?" A human staff member who remained standing throughout looked down at Nexus, nudging him playfully with his boot. "Stop hiding. Those are just training rounds. No actual fragments." As the range staff fired around the humans and the training rounds, apparently made of soft plastic, detonated in the distance, the recruits continued firing, switching targets when instructed. All the human recruits completed their first attempt, most qualifying immediately, and then it was the aliens' turn. Vela watched the range staff pour sandbags around the firing positions, bracing herself for the noise when she heard a whimper behind her. She turned to see one of her fellow Canary throw down her weapon and cower toward the ground. The two males beside her kept their ears back and averted their gaze. "What are you doing?" Vela hissed, striding over to the blue-furred Canary and delivering a swift kick to her thigh. "Stand up. You can't embarrass us like this." "They're going to shoot at us," the Canary wailed, trembling uncontrollably. "They're going to shoot at us and explode the ground around us. It was supposed to be easy." "Get up, you coward," Vela snarled, kicking her twice more before grabbing the back of her uniform and hauling her off the ground. "Get up. You will not disgrace us here and now." "No, no, no." The Canary howled as Vela continued to slap and strike her. The other males looked away. It was Vela's responsibility to discipline the female, not theirs. It was their cultural way. Vela retrieved the TCAL striker from the ground and thrust it into the blue Canary's arms, seizing her by the ears. "Hold that weapon and complete the training. We've come this far, and we will not falter when it's time to prove ourselves. Stand up and stop whimpering." Vela released her ears and turned around as the other Canary shakily straightened, sniffling and repositioning the weapon. When she fully turned, Vela found herself staring into Drill Instructor Raven's eyes. The human was so close that Vela could feel her breath disturbing the fur on her snout, and she swallowed nervously. Drill Instructor Raven grinned menacingly, her eyes so predatory that Vela thought she was in trouble. Her voice was hushed, just audible enough for only Vela to hear. "That's what I'm talking about, Fuzzy. Keep your people in line and show no fear. There's leadership material in you, and I swear I'll extract it and make you display it." Vela swallowed, suddenly feeling overheated in her uniform, but nodded. "Yes, Drill Instructor." Vela's resolute stance had strengthened the other Canary, inspiring both the Serpenians and Sylvani as well, even though many had been on the verge of quitting. Vela was pushed forward by Drill Instructor Raven. "You first, Fuzzy. You too as well. Don't hide behind that Serpenian. I can see your ears." The human began shoving aliens forward toward the range until the stations were occupied, and again the staff took their positions, standing above the Canary, Serpenian, and Sylvani shooters with magazines loaded. "Those are blanks, right?" Vela heard Thorn ask from several positions away. The human range officer removed his magazine and showed the Sylvani its contents, and Vela heard Thorn's sharp intake of breath. "Don't jerk, don't move, and you'll be fine," the officer said, then slammed the magazine back into place. "Multiple rounds at medium distance. Pause and wait for further instructions when firing sequence is complete. Range is active. Don't take excessive time. Aliens," the voice announced, and Vela narrowed her eyes at the term. She disliked being called alien. It always sounded derogatory and overgeneralizing. She yelped in surprise when the officer beside her fired a round directly in front of her hands, coating her fur and eyes with sand. Vela sputtered, blinking the sand from her eyes. There was a commotion above her, and the officer moved aside, replaced by boots she recognized as drill instructor Raven's. "Fire your weapon, Canary," the human woman roared, discharging a burst of rifle rounds into the sand near Vela's head. "Fire your weapon. The enemy is approaching to desecrate your courts. Shoot, shoot, and eliminate." Vela shook her head, ears erect and fighting back tears of panic as she peered through the optic on the rifle. The computer display was triangulating her shot when a boot smashed against her rifle. Drill instructor Raven kicking the sight completely off the top rail. Vela watched the small tan device somersault down the range and whipped her head around to stare up at the human in shock. "Shrapnel has destroyed your targeting optic. Use your iron sights and neutralize the enemy," Drill instructor Raven screamed, her wide smile threatening as she fired 2 more shots into the ground near Vela. "Shoot, shoot, damn it." Vela returned to the rifle in a panic, her eyes and fur covered in sand from the human shooting close to her, and attempted to align the iron sights. Her species' weapons aimed themselves, locking onto targets via internal artificial intelligence that distinguished friend from foe and signaled the shooter when safe to pull the trigger. Here, it was just her finger, her eyes, a rear circular sight, and a post she somehow had to align. She squinted one eye with the other closed, then squeezed the trigger. The rifle hammered her shoulder, and she winced as it ejected the partial casing into the air with a metallic sound, cycling and chambering another round. Drill instructor Raven, holding her rifle in one arm and checking her data device with the other, fired 2 rounds into the ground near Vela without looking, terrifying the Canary when she realized the human wasn't even paying attention. "Center mass on target," Drill instructor Raven called out, kicking Vela's shoulder. Again, Private Vela." Vela shook her head, clearing some sand from her face, and repositioned behind the iron sights. The sights wavered due to her trembling hands as she fired again, then twice more, hoping to advance past this stage. The ground trembled as mortar rounds descended, filling the target area with smoke and dirt fountains. 1 on target, 2 off. "Poor performance, Private Vela," Drill instructor Raven announced with a laugh, turning to fire 2 shots into the ground near the Sylvani beside her before turning back. "Keep shooting." By the time Vela had completed all the firing commands broadcast from the speakers and rotated off the range, she was covered in sand and dirt, shaking from head to tail tip. She felt drained despite the brief duration, and found Nexus and Thorn in similar states, the 3 standing together and breathing heavily. That was intense. Nexus hissed shakily, cradling his rifle against his chest. "But I did hit all targets." Thorn wiped his forehead with his palm, his hand coming away drenched with sweat. "I was performing well until that sadistic instructor started kicking my legs. He kept saying I had it too easy and was too accurate." "How did you fare, Vela?" "She kicked my sight off," Vela said listlessly, brushing at her fur with jerky movements as she stared wide-eyed at the ground. "I had to use the iron sights." Vela turned and saw the blue-furred Canary from earlier vomiting into the grass, her face covered in sand and dirt, with a wet stain on her pants that Vela wished wasn't visible. At this point, however, she couldn't blame her fellow canary. If anyone had flinched at the wrong moment, they might have been killed. "All right, my little stargazers," Drill Instructor Storm called out, scrolling through his data device as he removed his uniform belt. "Most of you passed this phase, but don't worry. There are more challenges ahead for you to prove yourselves." "More," the other canary cried out, suppressing a burp as she wiped vomit from her chin. Overhead fire range conditions in effect. All range staff avoid standing on the range and keep all crew-served weapons barrels facing forward. The voice announced over the speakers, and the barrels of large crew-served machine guns extended from the concrete bunker, their muzzles pointing skyward. While the human recruits retrieved hearing protection from their packs, the aliens watched in horror. "We have to do it again," Vela asked quietly, observing as the first human recruits began walking toward the range once more. "Indeed," Drill Instructor Storm confirmed with a chuckle. "Private, we have multiple courses on this range under different conditions. Why else would we store ammunition here? Don't worry, though. We have food vehicles arriving to provide hot meals." Nexus brightened at this news. "Food vehicles? What kind of food are we getting?" "Spicy stew," Drill Instructor Storm said absently, but looked up with a grin as the blue-furred canary made an audible gurgling sound. Another splash of vomit hit the grass, and Vela closed her eyes, a single angry tear trailing down her furred cheek. Humans were definitely forged from tougher material than the rest of them, and this would be an extraordinarily long evening.